I am consistently fascinated by the creative process. And one thing that I want the average person to understand is that uh, very often composition isn't just, oh, I had a dream of this. This thing was like, the whole piece was dropped into my mind in the middle of the night or something like that, and I jumped up and wrote it all down. There's such a technical process to creating a piece of music.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating the different ways that people will approach that process. How do you begin a piece of music, and what's your process in starting a new piece or in developing a piece that you've started?
Um, Bob was really into, and I try to encourage my students as well, but the idea of pre-compositional work. So, you know, I've been lucky enough lately that, a lot of what I'm doing is writing for other people, whether it's commissions or that sort of a thing. So in some ways I have like, okay, I want you to write a 7-minute tune. I want you to write in this style. So some ways I've already been given some parameters. But if I'm given the freedom, actually I just got another commission. It's like, do what you want. I'm like, okay.
Cool,
And
that's fun.
so I have to, my first process is the macro level. It's like, is this gonna, like, what kind of style am I getting into? Like, and the length of it, perhaps. And then where am I featuring a certain person? So I am thinking about those practical sort of things. And then so if I decide, for example, if it's a length of 10 minutes let's say, and I'm like, okay, for me, a successful piece for me, and specifically for me, is like, I need to make sure I have about 33% upfront of writing, of exposition, if you will, and then probably a solo section that's very traditional, maybe something featuring the band, and then out after that. So and I'm not necessarily, you don't have to stick to that plan. But the idea is that if you have something in front of you, then you have something that's tangible. It's not like sitting around at the piano and tinkering away. You've actually made a plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing I think about is like, I like to try to write contrasting pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about, what did I just do last? And then, so I'm going to contrast to that. And then, so I'm thinking even about tonal centers sometimes, that contrast to that, or like realms of, what modality, if you will. And then so I'm like, okay, so then I'll plan it to be that. Then I will probably I'll take an exercise that I know can generate the material in the direction that I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but there is still also, like, sometimes there is still like tinkering at the piano, and there's still like the aspects of, oh, I had this idea, and write it down. And then I'll take that, though, that whatever that musical idea, and then I'll apply it with the exercises to try to manipulate or develop that.
Mm.
And the funny thing, you talk about that, like, yeah. And when you first start writing, it is definitely that, oh, it came in a dream, or, I started playing the piano, it just came to me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, right. Okay, that's great. But no, well, it's true, and it does happen that way, and most of us start writing and composing that way. But the other problem that we get is it's so personal. Like, if you were in a lesson and your teacher said to you, no, you're playing that scale wrong, or you can't use those notes over this chord, or you're out of the style, you wouldn't think twice about it. It's not a personal attack. But if I say to you, like, you're not really developing your theme here, but you're like, I love that so much. And so that's the problem with composition. And something else that Bruckmeyer taught is that you got to take remove your ear from yourself and put it on the piano, is how he would say it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that gave you that visual of, like, you got to detach yourself, because you have to.
Is that an ego thing you're talking about, or is that
No,
like a? What do you mean by that?
it's like a personal, because when you write a composition is just so personal, as opposed to, like, I think when we play our instruments and we're playing through repertoire, it is personal, obviously, like in terms of like we're happy that we're able to replicate, like to perform. That's the very personal feeling. But it's harder to take criticism on something that you've created, like from scratch, and hard to see past like what you're in love with it.
Sure.
And that's what it is. It's because we have to detach ourselves from like what we think is a really good solid idea. We have to make sure that it works.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's not ego. It's just emotional attachment. More so. And because with compositions, it is because there's the whole for some people it's like a concept, like, oh, I was watching these birds and they look so lovely and it's spring out and I just felt this song coming. I'm like, okay, but it's not. What are you doing with it?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's all it is. And the ability to edit, and that's what it is. So so that's part of the process, is trying to be like having like discretion and really paying attention to like, is this really working here? Is this not working here? Am I developing this? Have I strayed away from the idea too much? Is it time to move on? So that's part of the process of it. It's funny because there's a fine line between the idea of being creative and being like very like a mathematician in some weird ways. But music is that way, and so is art. If you look at art, a piece of art is like, is it centered? Is it off centered? What's the ratio?
Sure.
There's a math element to it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it sounds like there's that little spark in all of these instances. There's a little spark of inspiration, and then a lot of it is just what you do with it, or how you develop it, or how you build on it, or play with it, or
yeah, and it's different for different people. I mean, this is just from the way that I was. I guess you could say that I was taught, or the the methodical way that I approach things.